Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all of my dear friends here today, no matter if I've met you before or not. My name is Ingelore. Ingelore Honigstein. I'm from Florida. I was born in Germany. In a small town named Kuppenheim. Kuppenheim, Restadt. And this is near the Rhine River. I'll show you on the map here. This is where the Black Forest is located. So, I'll start my story and tell you some things that happened in my life. When I was a little girl, I was very wild. I couldn't speak, but I was very wild. My voice box was paralyzed. My parents happened to send me to a private teacher, and when I was there, I stayed in a foster parent home. My foster parent was a speech therapist. It took me a very long time to learn each word. For example, when I was trying to learn the letter A, I would try to say A, and then my speech teacher slapped me on the back, and I screamed out and pronounced the letter A. And my speech teacher said, "That's it, you did it." And that seemed to jumpstart something in me so that I could then use my voice. And I'd practice the letter A, and I'd do that many times, and then I'd move on and practice the letter B. And in speech therapy, you may be familiar that you have to produce enough air, enough plosiveness to make a paper move. And I would do this over and over again. I'd practice. It's almost like I had to go through rehabilitative therapy, almost like someone after a stroke has to relearn to walk. I had to learn how to use my voice. And I would cough all of the time when I was trying to practice using my voice. It was so very difficult. And I didn't have much of an education beyond just speech therapy. So at a later date, I was sent to the Heidelberg School for the Deaf. It's here on the map. It's in between this area right here. Heidelberg was on the Neckar River. And I learned a lot there at the Heidelberg School for the Deaf because they used visual aids while they were teaching. They may have a picture of a car with a word in its text form, and they would do this for various pictures and nouns. And I was at that school for 3 years. But mind you, I was the only Jewish student in the school. And I've got a picture of myself in my class during my time at that school. I'm back in the back row there. That's a picture of me while I was at the Heidelberg School for the Deaf. I have to say it was a bad time for me. The students would pull my hair and pick on me and spit on me. And I was taught by a teacher who himself was a practicing Nazi. The year that I was in school there was 1937. And at that time, You may be familiar with crystal glass exploding at a temple. Crystal Knot, the night of broken glass. Now that happened at that time. It was a crisis situation, but I didn't know about it. And I remember asking the principal and my teacher saying, "Why are the students picking on me so terribly? I didn't do anything to them." And the principal said to me, "You really should go home now." And I said, "Why? Why are you sending me home?" And he wouldn't tell me. No matter how I begged, he wouldn't tell me. You have to remember that if he actually told me why I was being sent away from the school, he could lose his job. So I was sent home by train from Heidelberg to my hometown. There was no one at the train station for me. So I had to pull my suitcase by myself from the train station all the way to my house. And when I got to my home, I was shocked to see my front door barricaded by two wood beams crossed. These are pictures of my home, and one is displayed on the screen above me. I had a beautiful villa home. So I couldn't get in through the front door like I normally would, so I went around the back, rapped on the door, and when I was trying to get my mom to let me in, and she opened the door quickly and rushed me in, and I said, "Mama, what's happened?" And she was surprised to see me. And I told her what the principal said, that he had sent me home. And I said, "Mama, why are there wood crosses on the doors? What's going on?" It was at that time that my mother told me, and I couldn't believe what she was saying. And I said, "Where's my father? Where's Daddy gone?" And she told me then that my father was sent to Dachau. And this was a concentration camp that was near Munich. So my father had been sent to a concentration camp. In November of 1938, much of our community's men and women had been sent to concentration camps. At that time, I was between 13 and 15 years old. It happened that my Aunt Cora was a teacher, and she came to me and took me to Berlin. In Berlin was an Israeli Jewish school for the deaf, and it was in East Berlin, closer to the White Sea. I was only there as a student from September to December. And they were all Jewish students, mind you, so I was no longer the sole Jewish student. But most of the students at that time had gone away with the principal, Dr. Reich, and they had been taken to England, London in particular. So there were only 2 teachers remaining at the school and very few students. Principal Kahn had taken over the leadership of the school, but very few people were left there. He knew very few words in Hebrew. So a counselor at the school took me to another family's home so that I could learn a vocation, so that I can have a successful future. I learned how to cook. I learned how to make the beds and keep the house, how to sew, many domestic activities. I have a newspaper clipping to show you. This happens to be today's paper. Brandenburg Gate. I said door, but it's really Brandenburg Gate. This is in an area called Postum. Postum Place is where you'll find Brandenburg Gate. It was a very wealthy family that I was sent to learn a vocation with. Now, I was there and had to commute by trail car or train, commuter trains. They're day trains, like a tram. They were a streetcar, more like a trolley car. And I always made sure that I left the family's home at about 7 p.m. because at the time there was a curfew for Jewish families that they needed to be indoors by 8 p.m. No questions. But on that particular evening, the trolley car came late. And when it got to be late, mind you, I was only 15 years old, but when it got to be late, I began to get worried. And it took about a half hour on the train to get to my home. And it was almost 7. The train was running late, and I needed to be home by 8. But I got home, got off the train. I tried to keep my cool. I walked very quickly and very quietly. But there happened to be 2 young military men who had the day off, and I noticed that they were following me, and there were 2 of them. So I began to run, and I was so close to my school, but they got to me before I got to the school. They took me away and brought me to their room. And it was in their room that they forced me to perform many sexual acts against my will. I didn't know what was happening to me at the time. I knew that I was bleeding very badly. And when they let me go, I could barely walk. I was in terrible, terrible pain. I walked the short distance to the school, and I knocked on the door frantically. But they wouldn't let me in. People were not allowed in after the curfew time. And I just kept knocking and knocking and knocking. It was quiet, and all the lights were turned off, and quickly the door was opened and I was shuttled inside. And when they saw the state that I was in, they let me in. And after that, I said to the principal of the school, I said, I just can't go back to that family's home. I need to go back home to my family. And it occurred about the same time that Christmas vacation would occur. So I said, I need to go home for this time. And when I got home, I never told my mother or father what had happened to me. When I got home, my father was there, and I wondered, how did he get away from the concentration camp? It's impossible. People are not released. But what had happened is there were gentlemen. There was one man in particular who wanted my father to explain the ins and outs of his business and how he got materials. My father owned a hardware store, you see. So he had many contacts. He knew where to get supplies and materials, and they wanted this information from him. In return for that information, he was granted his freedom from the concentration camp. Then at one point I got a letter from the American consulate, and that was located in a place I'll show you on the map, a place called Stuttgart. That's where the American consulate was located. So I went to the consulate. My mother and father accompanied me, and they wanted to remain with me. I was only 15 at the time. Keep that in mind, I was young. But the American man at the consulate said, "No, you need to come with me by yourself. Your parents cannot accompany you." And I told him, I said, "I'm willing to read for you, sir. I'm willing to write for you." And he didn't want that. Instead, he wanted to test my hearing. I can hear some sound, but I don't hear it at a level where I can understand the words. So he turned me around so that I was not facing him. Of course, I couldn't understand what he said, but I can only attribute it to God being there assisting me that day, in that moment. And if you can imagine how lucky I was to be able to utilize the reflection of the gentleman as he stood behind me from a picture on the wall that was in front of me. It acted almost like a mirror. And I was able to focus on the picture and try to lip read him in his reflection, but I just couldn't do it. So I turned around. I thought my best bet here is to play dumb. And I said, "Please, sir, I so badly want to go to America. I love America. I want to go to school in America. I want to receive an education. I'd love to learn English. Please," I begged him. I said, "Sir, I know you said some words, but I'm just not sure of what they are." He ordered me to turn around once more. I was as nervous as could be. And I said, "I think you said some funny words to me. What is it that you said?" It was at that point that he gave me a paper. He wrote something on it. I didn't know what it was for. He said, "You have to sign up on this paper." So I said, "Okay, I have to sign up," and that was the end of it. I left that room, and I saw my father and mother, and their first question to me was, "Did you sign something?" And I said, "Yes." And they were both filled with joy. And I said, What does that mean?" And they said, "That means you were granted your visa." My parents were crying uncontrollably. But you have to understand that I still didn't have a clear understanding of what it was that had just taken place. But it was time that we needed to get back to my hometown. And we were given an order to vacate our home within 24 hours. We had to leave our beautiful home. We had to leave everything. The house wasn't sold. It was simply abandoned. We packed our belongings, everything that we could fit into backpacks. I often struggle with the word in English. I know how to say it in German. But I had a backpack, and my parents had suitcases packed with as much as we could pack within that short time frame. And from my hometown, we went to an area north here near the Netherlands. I don't recall the name of the town. I was so nervous, and I was so young, and naturally, before we entered another country, we had to stop at the border town that was just before you entered Holland. Nazi soldiers were there at the border town to give a personal check, an exam of the belongings that everyone had with them. So I gave them everything that I had, and they said that we had to leave it all there. And I said, "No, I really would love to have this sent to my Aunt Rosa." This was my father's sister. I wrote a letter, "Please send this to my aunt and uncle. Please keep it safe." And I had nothing left. We had to remove everything that we had on our bodies. We had no money even for a cup of coffee or food. but we were able to board the train again and arrive in an area called Rotterdam. This is in Holland. It was there that I met my great uncle. He's the one who solely supported our family. He had a brother who lived in America, who lived in Georgia in particular. He helped almost all of my family who came here to America. I have first and second cousins who are here in America as well. My family and myself were the last to travel and immigrate to America. So when I met my great uncle, we happened to go to this hotel. I don't recall the name, I'm sorry, but I remember walking in through the front doors. It was a great big door that was open wide to reveal a dining room. And I saw the most beautiful display of fresh fruit. I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never seen so much fruit in my life. We have beautiful peaches and pears and apples, cherries that are grown in Germany, even blackberries. But we don't have things like bananas, we didn't have oranges, we didn't have those fruits that were grown typically in other countries. And that was what was laden on the table, all of these luscious fruits. And I thought, boy, oh boy, look at all this food. We were brought to a beautiful room with a lovely, comfortable bed where I immediately fell asleep. In an instant, I was asleep. And I think that we passed out from just exhaustion and the stress of the situation. The same was true for my parents. We were so tired. We didn't realize that people were waiting for us to come downstairs to eat. So my uncle happened to come up after a bit of time and knocked on the door and said, "Come downstairs, please. Get yourselves ready and come down with us." And again, I entered the dining room, and there were all kinds of cold cuts, all kinds of cheeses, all kinds of... I've never seen so much food available. And you may be wondering why I was so surprised. But in Germany, we had ration stamps. And oftentimes our food was rationed, and when we went shopping, we were given the lesser quality products. We weren't given the quality choice cuts of meat. We were given the bones with the fat and the gristle. We made soup. We became very resourceful with the meager supplies and foods that we were given in our country. So seeing all this food was a new experience for me. And you had to have with you an ID book all of the time. Any time you went into any store, any public place, you had to have your ID book with you. Now, my name is Ingelore, and everyone at the time, everyone, mind you, had to use the middle name Sarah. Every woman, regardless of what her true middle name was, had to use the middle name Sarah. Men had to use the middle name Israel. No matter what their birth name was, their middle name on their ID had to be either Sarah or Israel. I wish all of you would go to Washington, D.C. at some point and visit the Holocaust Museum for yourselves. You simply must see this with your own eyes. Read every bit of information, read every plaque, read every brochure and bit of information that you can see. I explained to my husband Paul, who just died just 5 months ago. I explained every bit of this to him. We went one time where there was an interpreter provided at the museum. My husband was in a wheelchair at the time, and he was thrilled to be able to see it in person, the entire museum. You'll see there at the front that they have passports that on the front are stamped with a J for Jude. I gave mine to my other son, who happened to misplace it. That's unfortunate that I don't have mine, but I urge you, please, with all sincerity, to see the Holocaust Museum for yourselves. So getting back to my story, upon arriving to Holland, I couldn't eat very much, even though there was tables full of food. My stomach had just shrunk from my past deprivation. 2 days after that, everyone there boarded a ship. We boarded a ship called the Volendam number 1. There was a number 2 series in that ship as well, but we were definitely on the number 1 ship. We were housed in what would be the equivalent of the basement of the ship. If you can imagine the room, it had bunk beds in it because there were multiple people. There were 4 people in a room, so each small room had 2 bunk beds, and I happened to get the top bunk. The women were in one area, and the men were housed in another quarter just for men. It happened that my mom got terribly sick, just from the nerves and the stress of it all. She was very, very ill. I happened to go up one time to the dining room by myself, and I thought, where is everyone? No one's here. There's a ship full of people, but where are they? As it turned out, everyone was experiencing extreme seasickness. I was alone in the dining room, and one of the Navy sailors came to me and said, oh, come join us. Come have dinner with us. It was the sailors in their dining hall. I don't know what they call that area of the ship in particular, but they urged me to join them, to eat with them, since none of the other passengers were able to eat dinner. And that was my first experience, to be with a group of all men and be the only woman in the group. Again, I was still just 15 when this happened. But it was nice to be able to be out from my quarters and get some fresh air and walk around. Now, mind you, everyone was seasick. And we were going through, that time, the English Channel. The English Channel. It was bad weather. It was high waves, great turbulence on the waters. And if you can imagine looking out, trying to get some fresh air, but seeing in the water enormous mines, bombs that could explode. You would see these great big mines with spikes sticking out of them. Perfect description, actually, Lore. And they were in the water, and I could see these, and I just prayed that one wouldn't inadvertently bump into the boat and explode. We all had life jackets on. They were required. And I had mine on. And I was the only one out there because everyone else was sick. And I watched so carefully. I thought, if I just blow hard enough, I can just push it away from the ship. I could just blow it away so that it doesn't hit the ship. After 24 hours of traveling through the English Channel in this very dangerous situation, we got through it safely, and everyone was allowed to remove their life jackets, but I refused. Mind you, I was the only deaf person, and so I kept mine on, in case anything had happened. It took 10 days passage for us to arrive to Hoboken, New Jersey. And we came upon the harbor where there were many other boats lined up. But prior to our arrival in New Jersey, I had gone up on the deck to get some fresh air. It was kind of that early morning, still a little bit dark, still a little bit bright. And I saw what I thought was glittering stars. And I asked the sailor, I said, well, what are those lights? What is that glittering? And he said, that's America. And I raced back to my quarters. I said, Mama, you must get up. Please get dressed. I told everyone in the room, everyone, please, we're here. We're in America. Get up, get dressed, come out and see it. And so we all went to the top deck of the ship. And as we got closer and closer, those glittering lights, through those glittering lights, we saw the Statue of Liberty standing tall. And I recall being in school, seeing the Statue of Liberty, pictures of it. And I knew that the Statue of Liberty meant freedom to us all. I watched the people in the back behind me, and everyone was weeping. Everyone was crying. We were crying because we had 3 very real worries. We were free, finally, but how would we get jobs? And where would we live? And what about the homes that we left behind? But no matter, we were arriving that moment to the harbor, and we all get off the ship one by one. We had to be checked personally, and I was with my mother and father as close by as I could stay. And they said, no, you can't go. You need to go to another place. And I said, why? I'm with my parents. And they said, you need to go to another place because you're deaf. And I was so upset, crying uncontrollably when they told me that. Now, when I cried, I got blotchy on my face, and they thought that that was chicken pox, that I may have to be quarantined. But they told me to sit in this one place near the exit. I wasn't able to leave, and I sat there and finally calmed down. And when I calmed down, realized crying wouldn't get me anywhere, the blotchiness left my skin, and it returned to its normal color. And they said that because you're deaf, you're going to need to go to Ellis Island. But when I calmed down and they realized that I wasn't sick or contagious, I was able to leave. And that took all morning. We arrived in the very early morning, and I wasn't released until the late evening. That was February 22nd, 1940. I will never forget it. It's Washington's birthday. The word that I'm thinking of is Hayes. It's a place where we had to go to search for jobs. They gave out jobs there. What is that word in English? Someone help me with what this word would be in English. Agency, maybe. Any immigrant who arrived to America, they all came to this particular place. An agency where they went to seek employment. And this person, when I went to the agency, they found a place for me at the Lexington School for the Deaf. I would stay there at the school, live in the dorms. So that was good. I had a place to be educated. My mom was a chambermaid. That was the job that she was given. It was at a place on Park Avenue. My father was given the job of a gardener at Mount Vernon. So I went to school at the Lexington School for the Deaf, and I learned so much there, many different things. But I had to start all over again my speech therapy to help me learn the American accent, to change it from the accent of my native language. I had a mirror to look into and earphones to put on my ears, and endless practice was how I learned. And at the end of the day, on the weekends, I'd leave the dorm and visit my aunt and my cousin. Everyone was working at that time, but I noticed that while I was attending school, I kept gaining weight. So I went out onto the street, and I happened to see across the street a sign that said Dr. Vogel. That's a German word that means bird. I recognized the name. So this was a middle-aged doctor, and I said to him, "Can you speak to me in German?" And he ushered me into his office, and it's at that point that I told him the story of what happened with the 2 soldiers. I said, "I haven't had my period since then, And he gave me a physical exam, and I had to give him a urine sample for the rabbit test, or a pregnancy test. And he told me at that time that I tested positive. I was pregnant, about 2 months pregnant. I didn't know it. I had no other symptoms other than just some weight gain. I said, Doctor, I want an abortion immediately. What those Nazi soldiers did to me, the two of those gentlemen in one night, is unacceptable. I simply cannot give birth to a child that is a product of that horrific evening. I said, I'll take something myself. For the sake of my sanity, I need to believe at this time that the abortion is the right thing to do. But it wasn't allowed because I was underage. I needed to have my parents' permission. But if you may recall, I never told my parents what happened that night. I was ashamed what had happened to me. I know my father very well. I knew that he'd be angry if I told him what had happened. And the doctor said to me, don't worry, I'll speak to your parents for you. I'll tell them myself. My mother came over that time and she was explained everything by my cousin to what had happened, my current situation, and she was shocked. Now my father was in Mount Vernon, so he came as well, because both of my parents had to sign their consent. We were immigrants and I was underage, and so they had to sign for this procedure to happen. And we had no insurance at the time. So this happened on as a secret, in the doctor's office. I had the procedure, and then I was sent home. After the abortion was complete, I was sent home with 2 weeks bed rest. And the doctor said, I support your daughter's decision. My father wanted to pay for the abortion. He said, I'll get the money any way I can. And the doctor said, you don't owe me for this at all. This is my gift in supporting your daughter. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you met your first husband, or do you want to open the floor to some questions? Well, does anyone have any questions for me first? We'll have someone come up here to copy sign.
Any questions? No, you don't have to stand. Hello. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you very much. I have a question about before you came to America. You went to 2 different deaf schools, right? Did they sign at all?
No, we were not allowed to sign. They were all oral programs. If I signed something outside on the street, that was a different story. But if we were caught signing in the school, they had a very thin switch that they wrapped our knuckles with, and it hurt. We were hit with that if we were caught signing.
I'm wondering about your uniform. Is that your dress?
This is a customary dress that I would wear from my hometown. It's not a school uniform. This was representative of the clothing that we would wear in my hometown. I had a white apron that went with this that is completely worn out. The white blouse has hand embroidery on it. The flowers and the edging is all hand embroidered. And the blue material has quite a bit of weight to it. It's very heavy. Now, if you saw me in this particular dress, you'd know that I was from the area called Baden. And other towns, another one locally nearby was called Bayer. And they had their own customary dress. And Bavaria, another area, had their own customary dress. So you knew, based on what someone was wearing, where they were from. And it was the particular customary dress of the particular areas. And that wasn't true of just Jewish people. That was true of Gentiles as well.
Can you show us a picture again of your class and show us where you are?
That's me right there on the very end. Oop, it's going to take just a bit for that to focus.
Any other questions? Since you've arrived in America, have you visited Germany again, or how do you feel when you go back to Germany?
I have visited Germany, yes. My Aunt Cora, that's my mother's sister, she came to America in about 1940 or 41. Don't know exactly when. She came via England to America, and she stayed with us. She now works in Chicago in an office environment. So my aunt at one time went to Germany to visit her parents' grave. And I'll show you the picture of that. I've got a picture of the grave sites. And it's in an area called Rimbach. It's near another area called Weinheim, near Heidelberg. It's kind of in between the two. So you can see the picture up there of the grave sites, the cemetery. And my aunt and I went to visit in 1971. We complained to the mayor of the town that it was a terrible travesty. It was awful that the gravestones, the tombstones were tipped over. Everything was overgrown with weeds. It was terribly unkept. We'll put another picture of that up. This is my aunt here in the floral dress. And the people behind her are the mayor and another individual who were to clean up the area in the cemetery. I visited again in 1983. It's written on the back of the picture. I don't recall the year, but I visited that, and there's a picture of me opening the gate to the cemetery. That's me in the picture. This is my husband, Paul. He was helping me at the time to look for the gravestones where my family ancestry was buried. And we had to stop because I became too emotional. So many memories flooded me while I was there that we had to stop. And I was told, I'm not sure, but I was told that the cemetery would be wiped out. And I don't know if this will really happen. I'll be finding out more later, but what I've heard is that the Jewish cemeteries will be wiped out. They will be no more. Did anyone go to the Olympics in Germany? If you had gone to the Olympics in Germany, please raise your hand. We have one person. I'm so glad that you were able to do that. What year was that? Do you recall?
I went to Germany in Munich. It was 1975.
Okay. I went to the Olympics myself in an area called Cologne. I was there for the Olympics in Cologne. My first husband, who is my son's father here, do you remember that gentleman? He was short. He had a bit of a hump. He was a little bit uneven in his shoulders. He told us at that time, he said, please sleep overnight. Stay with us. Stay with us in Dartmouth. Dortmund. We'll put the name of that area right up there. Dortmund Hagen. She explained to me, she said, come and take a walk. It's a beautiful park. I said, okay, so I went with them. I went to the park, and upon arriving at the park, I saw an enormous monument, what you'd call a monument. She told me at that time that this hometown, which was a large city, she said that Jewish people came and marched through the park. They came from all areas to come together. And they came to march, but they were all rounded up and shot, and all were killed. And I couldn't help but wondering, who founded this monument? How was it established? Who paid for the monument to be there? So I wanted to see for myself the sculpture that was in the stone. It's so very sad. It's a picture of myself and my husband from the back, looking up at the monument. Such an emotional thing to see. 298 Jewish people were killed in that park. They were all executed at the same time.
Do you know what year that happened?
1940 is when that took place. Mm-hmm. So, I went to my hometown when I was visiting Germany that time. You may remember my hometown is Kuppenheim, Rastatt. And my home that we used to live in was a very large villa. It was an estate house, very large. And when I came there, when I was sent home from school, I saw the front door barricaded. And you may remember that I walked around the back, rapped on the door. My mom let me in quickly and explained to me what had happened. Do you want to tell them the story about when you went back to your home again, when you visited Germany later? Yes. So I had visited. I was with my uncle's nephew, and he took me to my hometown. I said, I want to see my home again. I want to see if the house is still there. And it was still there, just as beautiful as ever. And you'll be surprised to know that the mayor of the city now owned my home. He took it over. He didn't buy it. He simply took it over. Is there a question?
When you got to escape, was your family wealthy?
No, I came to America with a visa. We did not escape. We had visas from the consulate.
But you were able to leave the country because your family had money to help. And you had relatives in America. That's the key. So after all the approval and signatures, that's when they were able to come.
It was my great uncle who helped our family members. He had money, the hotel owner. But anyway, my home was beautiful. We had a beautiful home on the inside, a beautiful silver set, beautiful fur coats and jewelry. Everything was stolen. What was left was a lamp, kind of like a chandelier. It had a star on it, almost like a Star of David shape. And that was still in the home. But before that, let me back up just a little bit. I told my husband, I said, come with me. Went to the front of the home. It was still there, as beautiful as ever. And I rang the doorbell. And a little girl answered, and I said, is your grandma or grandpa here? And I spoke to her in German, obviously, and said, is your grandma or grandpa here? And when they came to the door, I said, my name is Ingelore, and my father owned this house. My father was the owner of this home. And the woman became red-faced immediately upon hearing that. I said, do you mind if I come into this home? She let me in, and I looked around. We had a beautiful dining room set when my family lived there, and when I looked around, I saw that the dining room set was still there. We had a break front. It was my family's. It was still there, still filled with many of the small dishes that we had in it. My great uncle from Holland was an export-import businessman, and we had in our home trinkets and bits and small dishes from all over the country, and they were still in the break front, just as my family had left them. Now, I didn't tell her in detail. I didn't want to become more emotional than I was, and I didn't wish to cause trouble. But I told my first husband, Herbert, I said, we need to leave. I wished them farewell, and we left. I didn't thank them. I simply bid them goodbye. I could not thank them. And when my husband and I left, I became so emotional. And after that, I wanted to see my father's store, and that building was still standing as well. It still had some of the things that my father had in the store. This is a map of the area where I lived. This was where my father's business was located. It was at an intersection on the corner. In the middle area was a church. And this is the house where I lived. And you can see there's a circle around the area. It was a very, very old city. Outside of that circled, enclosed area is where the new city grew and expanded beyond the inner circle of the old city.
That was great. Thank you so much.
I thought there was one other thing I wanted to mention.
Didn't you want to explain about your first husband? It would be a good ending for your story.
Well, how I met my first husband. I was a little girl, maybe 13 or so, 13 or 14, somewhere in those young ages. My husband happened to be 15 years my senior, and he was a custom tailor. He had his own business. He went to Heidelberg as well. One of the families, they were farmers. Their name was Stroh. He was a shoemaker, and he would bring them material so that they could choose the material that they wanted to have their clothing made from. And he looked at me at the time. I was a little girl, and he'd pinch my cheek, and he'd wiggle my ears and pat me on the head, because I was a child to him at the time. And I never saw him again after that. Years later, after I had arrived in America, I was visiting my cousin one time. My cousin lived in the same hometown where my husband was from. It's an area called Weinheim. It's in the southern region, south of Frankfurt. Frankfurt and Heidelberg sort of flank Weinheim. So he came anyway years later in America to pick up my cousin for a date. And you may remember your cousin, my cousin. And I said to him, "What are you I was very nervy at the time, mind you. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here to take out your cousin. We're going on a date to the theater." And I said, "Theater? Theater's for her, but not for you." I said, No, that's not an appropriate thing for you to do. You and I need to be together. We were both deaf. We were the same. He lost his hearing when he was 5. He had scarlet fever, and an operation happened to cut the nerves at the back of his ears, and he was deaf from the age of 5. Now, he and I went out in the afternoon, not in the evening, but we enjoyed each other's company so greatly. The conversation came so easily. And after about a year, we were madly in love with each other. Madly in love. We got married. And it was just a very happy time for me. After 4 years, my son here, Frank, was born. And 3 or 4 years after that, my second son, Lester, was born. He currently lives in Hawaii. My son is married. He has 2 beautiful daughters. And my other son has 1 beautiful daughter with very long hair. She's a singer. She's 13 years old. She's taller than I am. I think I'm just a shrimp. She dances so beautifully, my granddaughter. She dances in the customary way that Hawaiians do. It's so beautiful. And I don't mean to brag, but I can't help myself. It's so different. She's got long blonde hair. All of her friends have long dark hair. She's the one blonde in the group. And she's so beautiful and graceful when she dances. She is involved in a singing choir, and they fundraise in many different ways.
I just wanted to add your husband Herbert. He was the leader of the Deaf Jewish Association, right?
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that. My Herbert, he was the president of the Jewish Club in Frankfurt. Now there are two Frankfurts, you know that. One was Frankfurt on the Oder River, and that's in the east area, east of Berlin, maybe west. I don't recall exactly. Here it is on, there's the Oder River. So there's a Frankfurt there near the Oder River, and there's another Frankfurt on the Main River. As you can see from the map, they're in opposite ends of Germany. He was surprised and suspicious of two things. He had so many custom orders. Before leaving for America, he had many, many custom orders for his tailor skills. He didn't know why he had so many orders. When I came to America, mind you, I couldn't afford to buy clothes. You would get a job and then be able to get clothes later, but you had to bring clothes with you. And his best friend was named Fritz. Fritz Hurst. He was not a Jewish man, but they were pals anyway. They were classmates from long ago and very close friends. And his friend Fritz told him, he said, please leave now for your safety. My husband said, why? See, now my husband didn't hear. He was deaf, and so he didn't know what was going on around him. And he was told by his best friend, please leave, go to Poland, go to France, go to Palestine, go anywhere for your safety, Africa, anywhere that you can, to leave here. He was warning all of the deaf Jewish people to come to Frankfurt. My husband did. He made announcements and shared the information with all of the deaf people that he could. And he got the word out through their deaf community that danger was on its way. This was 1936. He warned them as much as he could to leave the area. And sadly, no one would listen. What he said to those deaf community members was, he says, I want to say goodbye to all of you. He says, someday, somewhere, I will see you all again. I came to Israel with my husband's daughter. She had traveled with an agency. She was an interpreter. And she went to Jerusalem. With the Helen Keller Club. There was a group of them that had traveled together. And one woman came to me. I was there. And she said, what's your name? And I said, this is my name. My last name was Stifle at the time. And she said, no, you. Was your husband Herbert? I said, yes, it was. She knew that he had passed on. And she gave me kisses all over. It's almost like she thought that by kissing me, she would kiss and hug Herbert. And she had flags that she was waving to let everyone know. She told me what Herbert said to those deaf people that day, that someday, somewhere, I will see you again. That one person I did see again, thanks to my husband's efforts. I can't express to you how that felt. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Do you know what happened to your classmates, or have you seen them?
No, my classmates, I don't know. They all just disappeared. I don't even know their names. I have forgotten all of their names. And at the Lexington School for the Deaf, I don't even remember the names of those classmates. I had so much speech therapy and went to different classes. I had almost no time to remember the names of people. I carried my dictionary book with me all the time, anywhere I went. It was a small pocket German and English dictionary. I had it with me all the time, and I'd quickly look up words and point to the page and do my best to communicate with people. And to this day, I'm not able to find that little dictionary. It's so disappointing.
I just wanted to say, related to the deaf school in Israel, that she said she had gone to for 3 months. She didn't stay there a very long time. It was only 3 months. And then later, Hitler took over the school and sent over 246 children to the gas chamber. Whoever was left at that school went to the gas chamber. Some friends of mine in London. Yes, I do.
I don't know how, but that person went to England, Roster. That Roster is living here now in New Jersey.
There's also another person who lives in New York City. I forgot their name.
There are a few of them.
There are a few of them. And during 1942, it was too late to escape. That's when they took over the school and sent the children to the gas chamber.
There was the principal, remember, from Berlin, who took many of the children to London, England. And it was just that group that got to leave. Many of the children were left behind.
Yes, just hang on 1 second. The principal took 8 to 10 children to London. And by the time he wanted to go back to get more, the war had started, so he had to stay in England because he would have been a prisoner of war. One more question? What's the question?
My son works in the commercial advertising field on television. He's in that business. And my granddaughter works for Fox Network. She's an assistant. And my second granddaughter, she's 25, she's the oldest. She's a nanny.
I'm sure many of you want to meet her personally. Are you willing to stay so that you can meet some people? I have 2 announcements. The first is, just 1 second. We have 2 other speakers coming on November 2nd. This is a deaf man from Poland who was hiding in the ghettos, and he's going to tell his story. And this is a hearing person from Poland who was in the concentration camp. He was in 2 different concentration camps. So they're going to share their stories November 2nd here at noon. And I have another announcement. Can I borrow this paper? Are you familiar with Darfur? It's in Africa and the Sudan. Right now, genocide is happening there. And they're killing people because of their race. So if you want to see, or if you want to talk to the president or the UN and try to help to stop this from happening, please take one of these papers, and then online you can send a message to the president or the UN to ask them to please intervene and stop this. It's because we keep seeing it happening again and again, and it needs to end. Do you want me to put up your son's email address? He went to Germany himself. Frank went to Germany. His father left in 1939 and his mother left in 1940. And I think it will be even more effective, like, to see the museum in Germany and read or meet with Lore.
My son, he went to Belgium first. Was it Belgium?
Amsterdam.
Oh, Amsterdam. He went to Amsterdam in Holland for a business trip or something like that. And from there by train, he went to Berlin. He has an office in East Berlin. So he sent me an email and explained. We'll leave it up here so you can read it. But this was an email that he sent to me.
You're making us all cry. Very positive person. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. This is the second time that she's shared her story. She's had so many experiences, and this is the second time for her.
I want to thank all of you for sharing with me today. I love you all.